国家人权博物馆正在进行的纽西兰原住民族历史正义银幕叙事特展，展览主题就在呼应尊重怀唐伊条约的行动。接下来的IDA Specials 主题特写，节目团队特别专访到参与本次特展的毛利族导演以及共同策展人，一起来探讨怀唐伊条约的历史正义。From September 24, 2024 to March 23, 2025, the National Human Rights Museum hosts the special exhibition Whetu Te Maori, New Zealand Maori Historical Justice on Screen. And the special exhibition is co-organized by the New Zealand Commerce and Industry Office, and the curators are Dr. Lin Hao Li and Dr. Guo Peiyi from Taiwan Society for Pacific Studies. And the exhibition also invited Kathryn Graham from New Zealand as the film curator. Through the power of visual narrative, the life situation of Maori people in the history is truly presented, and how they protect their justice value and dignity. It is hoped that the New Zealand experiences can be used as a reference for Taiwan to further promote transitional justice of indigenous peoples. And through IDA Specials, let's find out what stories and messages this exhibition would like to tell us. And first, we are very honored to welcome today's distinguished guest, the co-director of FINA, Paula Whetu-Jones. Welcome.
Ko maunga haumi te maunga, ko waipawa te awa, ko takitimi te marae, ko takitimi te waka, ko Paula Whetu-Jones tōku ingoa. I am the co-writer and co-director of FINA, and I've been brought here to represent the film for the exhibition.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And also the film curator, Kathryn Graham. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Tainui te waka, ko Maunga Tautiri te maunga, ko Waikato te awa, ko Ngāti Koroki Kahukura te iwi, ko Kataraina Kiriama ahau. I am here visiting Taiwan as I was the co-curator of the exhibition that we're going to talk about. Kia ora.
As the Austronesian family, the Maori people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the indigenous peoples of Taiwan have shared similar histories and experiences. And both our two countries have been working towards reconciliation with mainstream society through transitional justice for many years. As the film curator, Ms. Graham, could you please briefly introduce the theme of the exhibition, and what message do you want to convey through this exhibition?
Well, the exhibition's name is Whetu Te Maori, which means, which is very much aligned with the current political protest movement that's going on in New Zealand called Whetu Te Tiriti, which is about protecting the rights of the Treaty of Waitangi. And Whetu Te Maori relates to protecting the status and the mana of Māori in relationship to Aotearoa. And the exhibition is very much about how the Te Tiriti of Waitangi and has been responded to by Māori. So that's why Dr. Lin and myself chose the films. Well, actually Dr. Lin selected the films that are being exhibited, but the overriding kind of theme of it is the relationship of Māori to the Treaty of Waitangi.
And what message do you want to convey through this special exhibition?
Well, I guess the message is that even though we have this treaty, that it hasn't been honoured by the treaty partner, and that what we've always tried to do is to keep the Crown and the government accountable to what they agreed to in that document. So there were two versions of the document, of the treaty. One is the English version, the other is the Māori version. And in the Māori version, the way that the English words were translated was in a manner that people of that time would understand and would be happy to sign that document. And so I guess the exhibition itself is very much about the response to that document, and the theme is that if you have a treaty and there is discussion around that treaty that is a discussion in partnership, not one part of the partnership telling the other part of the partnership what they should be doing. So our people have always believed that we retain more than we have given away with that document.
As we know that 5 films will be screened during the exhibition, Fina was the first film to be screened in this special exhibition on September 24th. And Fina tells the story of Fina Cooper, one of the most significant Maori social activists of the 1970s in New Zealand. And she led the 1975 Maori Land March, breaking gender barriers, defending Maori rights, and fighting for land. As the co-director, Ms. Jones, could you please tell us more about this story?
Yeah, Fina was born in 1895, and she was born from a chiefly whānau family, and she always knew her role within her family, her hapu, her iwi, and as a leader, I guess. And she broke down gender barriers, especially when the colonisers and the missionaries came, who preferred to deal with men because of their patriarchal society. And Māori women they inherited land and they had status. Only 13 Māori women signed the Treaty of Waitangi. And yeah, she was told that she couldn't do things, and she did things anyway. Like there was so much more in the film that we left out. Like she was head of the meat board up north. She was a sharpshooter, Pangaru sharpshooter. She was rugby club. She was head of the rugby union up north. There were so many things that she did that were in a traditionally male-dominated space, but she did it, and she did it well. She was very autocratic. And a lot of people didn't like that, but she knew that the treaty was a partnership, and she was making sure that those roles were adhered to, I guess, even though she was coming up against a whole lot of backlash, especially from men. And the Land March was the start of something a lot bigger, with the Treaty of Waitangi Act happened at the same time.
The Waitangi Tribunal was a way of giving our people a method to bring the government to account around land grievances and land loss.
Yes.
And so the tribunal, which still operates today, it has a certain amount of power, but it's not wholly. It's tricky, and it takes a long time, and takes a lot of resources from our people, and it's pretty tough. But finally, the Crown is being held accountable for its actions.
Yeah. And the Land March was it made Māori visible, and it made New Zealand understand or look at or see the racists.
And Māori in the 70s, particularly, starting in the 60s, but in the 70s, there was a lot of political activism, and Dame Fina was part of that, but she also wanted to do it her way.
Yeah.
So this was what she came up with.
So
really.
it put Māori in everybody's lounges and everybody's living rooms, and our grievances and the land losses and the alienation and the issues that were forefront for Māori at the time, because a lot of people did think that everything was okay.
Yeah.
And does Fina's life story also reflects the Māori women's empowerment movement?
We have a lot of strong Māori women leaders.
There's a tradition of, historically there's a strong tradition of wahine Māori being very standing and, taking a stand. And I think that the patriarchy, in terms of a Western construct, of course there is the whole, there will always be that physical difference between men and women, but Māori men and women were far more equal or far more part of the holistic way of looking at everything rather than a gender-based. But we don't even differentiate in Māori, real Māori language in terms of male or females.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting.
And a lot of Māori women leaders were left out of the narrative. Like in the suffragette movement, there were very strong Māori women who were a part of that, getting the votes for women. And Māori women owned land, but they weren't allowed that.
They weren't allowed to vote because it was only white men in the parliamentary system.
White men that owned land. And
so a lot of things that Māori do, we've kind of done alongside. Like when the parliament was first formed, then the Kingitanga movement had their own we had our own parliament, or own kind of justice. I mean, it's just we've sort of created things that run alongside of what's happening in the mainstream, in the sort of in the Western system.
And in this exhibition, we found that there is a documentary which is called The Maoli Land March, which is closely related to Whina. So, Ms. Graham, from the curator's perspective, what's the point of view presented by each of these two films?
Well, I suppose one is a dramatised version of Dame Whina's life, and so it's about her when she was a young girl, when she was in her middle years, and then as an old lady. So there's dramatic license taken with that story, and it is one particular story of the many different versions that you could make because it's scripted. So it's not, while it's based on fact, it's not necessarily totally true, there's dramatic license. But in Te Matakiti or Aotearoa, that is that was made by a documentary team that was embedded into the hikoi. Everything in that is documentary, and it was the very first documentary that was played on the brand new TV2, whenever it was, in 1978, I think. Yeah, so it is actually what happened and what went on. And Dame Whina is in it.
And speaking of fighting for land, the Bastion Point's occupation was one of the most important protests in the struggle for Māori land rights in New Zealand. Ms. Graham, could you please introduce more detail about the documentary Bastion Point's Day 507 to the audience? So
Bastion Point Day 507 is a documentary film made by one of our most famous Māori filmmakers, Mirata Mita. It basically takes place on the day leading up to, and the day that 600 police were sent out by the government of the time to remove the protesters from their own land. The protest actually was from Ngāti Whātua ki Ōrākei. They were there because they had always maintained that the land had never gone out of their ownership, and they had heard that there was going to be a residential development built there for really flash houses, and probably not for Māori. And so the protest was that they would occupy the land and until the government gave the land back. So what happened was they were forcibly removed after 507 days of occupation. They finally, through the Waitangi Tribunal, got the land back, which they now have back. So this was another absolute landmark protest actions that ordinary Māori took to hold the Crown accountable and get our land back, which they did. So,
and just like Taiwan indigenous peoples, Māori people also suffered discrimination and unequal treatment due to colonization, and which also led to the rapid loss of the land, language, and culture. And in the documentary No Māori Allowed, revisits how Māori suffered racial segregation and discrimination in their daily lives from 1920s to the 1960s. Could you talk about the impacts of this No Māori Allowed regulations on the Māori people based on their life experience?
The thing was, it was really it was quite localized. So what what the doco tells us about is the experience of local people in a very small town. So even though this is a small semi-rural town, it's only an hour out of Auckland. It's a place called Pukekohe, and there's another place near it called Tuakau, which these were towns that were founded on land that was confiscated by the government after what called the Māori Land Wars. And there was 1.3 million acres taken, or 1.7, sorry, I'd have to, acres taken from the Waikato people, and this was part of that parcel of land that was taken at that time. And so it's a very wealthy little town. It's a hub for market gardening and agriculture. And so Māori were used as labour force on their own lands, basically, that they've been removed from, which I think is a similar story probably to the Taiwanese people, Indigenous people. And so what was built up there was like the subclass of people who were Māori. And we weren't allowed into the hospital. We weren't allowed to be treated in the hospital. We weren't provided with housing in those towns. And you weren't allowed to even walk on the same side of the road as non-Māori. So no Māori allowed actually really only came to the attention once the book was written of the sort of the attention of the wider community and the wider population of New Zealand is when a book was written by an American academic called No Māori Allowed. And so finally someone from outside had come in and written a story about what had happened, which was essentially apartheid being practiced in New Zealand in this town. And it wasn't uncommon. There were other towns as well, but this is just the one that was written about. And the local people, there's so much trauma that they had never really faced it themselves. And so I went to a few of the meetings when they were talking about it, and you could just feel that in the room, that this was the first opportunity that their story had been allowed to be told. So it's an extraordinary, and when it was played, it was because it was first played on television New Zealand. When it was played, there was a lot of conversations that happened, and a lot of realisation that actually this is real, this really happened. These people were totally segregated against, and people's stories were finally heard. So it was kind of the start of a healing process and reconciliation process. Yeah, so it's a very powerful documentary.
And I wonder, is that only happened in a specific area, or is national?
No, it would have been national.
Yeah.
Like, from my own personal experience, my father is Māori and my mother is Pākehā. And there's lots of stories about, trying to get housing, rentals. And when my mother turned up, they would give it to her, and then when my dad turned up, they would take it away because he's Māori. And it's quite blatant. But I think, when you're talking about the impacts, it's a shame. It's a shame that you're not good enough, and that gets passed down and passed down. So and they don't, I remember watching
the shame of it.
Yeah, the shame of this being put onto you, your parents having to go through that, and then the shame is it's a generational trauma, and it's just not ever been good enough for. And when I watched that doco, my heart broke, because you could see that they wanted their story told, but they didn't want their story told because it opened everything up, and it forced people. But it's also when your mokopuna and your children are hearing these stories about how they were treated, and we're trying to grow our young people up to be strong and capable, and this is how their nannies were treated, and it's hard to.
Well, many of our children, anyway, now are of the generation that came through our language learning nests, Koanga Reo, that have where the language is being reclaimed. And I mean, two of my three children are relatively fluent Te Reo Māori speakers. Now, is it one generation to lose a language and three generations to get it back?
Just like in Taiwan, there's like half of population now live in the urban area, so we also have the same issues.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah. As we know that in the history, although the Maori people tried to assert their sovereignty by signing the Declaration of Independence and the Treaty of Waitangi, their sovereignty was lost due to different translations between English and Te Reo Maori. And it made us wonder what really happened in 1840. Ms. Graham, could you share more about the docudrama Waitangi, what really happened?
So basically what it tells the story, it sort of sends a reporter, a modern reporter, back to the day and then recreates, that voice recreates and interviews people that were there on the day. And so what it does is it shows that it was all done in this big rush, and that the translating of this English document, the treaty, was done overnight and became te tiriti. And so we never ceded our sovereignty. There was a confusion around the meaning of several of the words, which is particularly important, and that's where a lot of the misunderstanding has come from. And so Māori absolutely believe that we did not cede sovereignty, and the Crown has always maintained that we did. So there's this, it's this missing, it's just missing, and it's lost in translation. Yeah, so because at that time there would be no reason to sign something like that would, because we were still the majority population. It was more, I think, probably when you hear the dialogue and you read about it, it was probably just as much about the verbal story and the oral stories that were being told as the document itself, because when you think that we're an oral people, and so there was a lot of discussion on the day around the different parts of it as well, so which you can't really capture because that's the Western legal system, is you have a document and everybody signs it and then we all agree on it, So at the moment what's happening in Aotearoa is there's proposed litigation going on about it from our one of our new coalition government partners, and the Prime Minister and his party has said that they're not going to ratify it, that they're just more or less going through the motions, but it's caused a huge amount of trauma, and Māori people are very upset about what's being proposed to happen. So we see this as a living document.
The three P's that Māori sort of look at with the Treaty of Waitangi is participation, that we are participating in all of decisions, protection, that the Crown protects us, and that's against outside influences as well. Participation, protection, and partnership, and that we are equal partners. And the interesting thing, though, is back in the day, they thought we were all going to die. They were going to die out. But and in 1874, we were down to about 40,000 Māori in New Zealand. But
because of disease and other,
But it has backfired because we're up to 1 million now. Having more kids, but it's also people identifying as being Māori and keeping the culture alive.
And this year, Taiwan and New Zealand jointly launched the special exhibition. And what is your thoughts or prospects of this collaboration experience?
Well, it's great. It's fantastic. It actually, a lot of Māori won't know about the relationship and the similarities between the Indigenous Taiwanese and ourselves. So I think that that it's a fantastic opportunity both for both Taiwanese to learn about Māori and Māori to learn about Indigenous Taiwanese. Yeah.
And Ms. Jones and Ms. Graham, what inspirations do you hope to bring to Taiwanese society by telling the stories of Māori people? And why is this so important to you?
It's important for us to tell our stories because we're the only ones that can in the way that we do. And it's been such a long time we haven't been able to tell our stories. And I think also as women, it's important for young women in Taiwan to see what's possible. I mean, you know, if we can do it, then there's no reason, and we're quite happy to support anybody that wants to tell their own stories.
Well, I suppose Indigenous peoples in our struggle all around the world are at different stages, and Māori are at a particular stage. And what I think this exhibition brings is just a reflection of where we're at. And for other Indigenous people, so for local Indigenous people here, they'll be able to look at the stories that are being told and hopefully get inspired, or they'll want to get in touch with Māori and see and come up with some collaborations and partnerships, and look at ways that we can help each other tell each other's stories. So I think that it'll be, hopefully a lot of people will go and see it, especially Indigenous Taiwanese.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Kia ora.
Thank you for having us.
So let's take a break. For more stories from Ita See the World, please stay tuned.